Hi, this is Steve from PixelBump.com. Welcome to our new tutorial on how to make a tornado with fluid dynamics. Now, when I've done these in the past, it's been the result of a complex particle system and sprites. It was really labor intensive, and the results were never completely satisfying. So I wanted to come up with a way to do this with FumeFX that would be somewhat simple to set up and easily customizable. So here's my solution. Let's dig in. First thing I'm going to want to do is create a piece of geometry. And this is really going to be for reference for the shape that we're going to make our tornado. So this is where you can kind of make anything you're looking for as far as the look. I think for this one, I'm going to go ahead and just do the standard tower. If you want to do more of a cone funnel, all you need to do is shape your geometry to kind of match. So I'm going to set my cylinder here up, and I'm going to come down to its inputs, and I'm going to give it a few more height segments. That will probably be enough there, 6. And I'm going to jump into my point mode, and I'm going to start altering the shape. And let me just turn off soft selection right now. And I'm just going to kind of spread this out a bit. There we go. Move these guys up. Let's go ahead and bring this one out and this one out, and maybe just bring that in a little bit there. There we go. It's a pretty standard looking funnel kind of thing. So the next thing I'm going to want to do, now that I have a guide, is I'm going to go ahead and hide it for a moment. And I'm going to come over to my CV curve tool, and I'm just going to click out a few points. And I'm not terribly worried about how spaced they are, because the first thing I want to do is grab it, go over to my surfaces, I'm going to edit the curve, and I'm going to rebuild the curve. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that it's uniform. I want to keep the ends, everything else looks good there. I'm going to say maybe 32 spans. The more twists you want in the funnel of your tornado, the more spans you're going to need. I think around 32 to 48 will probably serve you pretty well. I'm going to go ahead and hit rebuild. And now if I come back to my component mode, you'll see we have a lot of new points here. So the next thing I want to do is I want to modify my curve, and I'm going to curl it. And I'm going to try an amount of 4, frequency of 1, and we'll curve it. There we go. Now we have a nice little helix. And what I can do is rotate it 90 degrees. And if I turn my cylinder back on, I can start to shape this. So what I want to do is start squishing it down, bring it up like that. I'll pull it out a little bit maybe, and back down. There we go. And I'll go ahead, bring in my component mode, and this is where I'll turn soft selection back on. And I'm just going to keep adjusting this until it's the shape I'm looking for. I think my fall off is way too strong right now. Maybe you do a fall off of 10. There we go. That's better. I'm just going to kind of keep adjusting it until I'm happy with the shape. And this is where, whatever shape you want, as long as you've got this kind of guide, you'll be able to stretch and reposition your funnel to match. let's bring this guy down, squish it a little bit, bring it down to here. I think we have too much of a jump there. The more even these are also, the better this is going to end up being. Now I want to grab my end here, and I'll turn soft selection back off for a second. I'm going to want to wrap this last piece here kind of around this edge, this wide edge. Oops. There we go. Something like that. That doesn't look too bad. The more spans you put in when you rebuild your curve, the more of these you can have. So with that in place, I'm going to go ahead and leave my component mode, and I'm going to duplicate this curve, and I'm going to offset it 180 degrees in the x-axis. So I've got them facing opposite each other right now. And you can add as many of these as you want. I got a pretty good result with 2, but you might want to try 4, 6, or 8. Whatever's going to fill in the tornado the best. All right. So the next thing I'm going to want to do is grab my curves, and I'm going to come over to their history. I'm going to edit, delete by type history, and then I'm going to modify freeze transformations. So now I've got my 2 curves, and I'm going to come up and switch over to my dynamics menu, and under effects I'm going to create a curve flow. So let me just go ahead, reset the tool, and I'm going to say number of control segments, I'm going to go with 12, and the emission rate, let's bump that up to maybe 500. And the particle lifespan, we may change this later. We'll just go ahead and create this, and we can always change the lifespan when we see how fast it moves up. So let's go ahead and hit create. And now we've got a bunch of little circles here. And what these circles all mean is this is the width of the area that the particles will go through. So if I go ahead and hit play, we'll start to see we have our particles twisting and turning up our tornado. Let's go ahead and give ourselves some more frames to work with. It looked like it took the whole 120 for them to move up, which isn't bad. Okay, now that we've got our particles moving all the way to the top, we have a choice to make. Either we can do a build on animation and let the particles flow up the shape, or we can start it off with them already emitted, which is what I preferred to do. So I'm going to grab my particles, and I'm going to come over to Solver's initial state, set for all dynamic. So now if I come back to my 0 frame, my particles stay where they are. Now I can just have the tornado fully in motion from the first frame. So let me go ahead and open up my initial state scene, where you'll see my tornado with the light and camera setup, and you'll see that it's exactly the same thing that I just showed you how to make. I took a little more time with this one, make sure my shape was a little better, but other than that, you're getting exactly the same thing in this one. So I'm going to come over to my FumeFX menu. I'm going to create my volume, and I'm just going to come in real quick before I do anything else and change a couple parameters. Because as you can see, I've got a lot more volume here than I need. So for the height, let's try 20, or say 25, so it has a little bit of room at the top. The length, maybe 30, and the width about 30. That looks pretty good. That gives it some room to move around. Let's say 40. Just want to make sure the volume at the bottom has enough to go around. So I'm going to come down. Let's go ahead and change our spacing. 0.2. That should be good to start. Let's go ahead, output. That looks pretty good. I just want to create a new folder here. FumeFX Tornado. And we'll call this FumeFX Tornado. And the playback, same frame range, reduce maybe a 3, so we don't have to tax our display too much. Maximum iterations, I'll drop that down to 80. The time scale I'm gonna wanna slow down because I don't want the fluid to move really, really fast. I wanna give it the impression that this tornado is large. So I'll want the fluid to move at a little bit of a slower pace to give the impression of scale. Under System, let's go ahead and bring our vorticity all the way up. Let's go with just a little bit of turbulence, 0.005. Scale for the noise, something fairly small. 24 frames of evolution, some high detail. Make scale a little smaller. Blocking sides I'll say is -y, so that way there's a floor it can interact with. I'm going to turn off simulate fuel. I'm going to want to bring up my dissipation a bit. So I'd like this to generate the smoke and then die off quickly. Otherwise we're just going to get a massive volume of smoke and we won't really see the shape of our tornado. Temperature buoyancy, maybe 0.1. I don't really want it to rise up very fast. And let's see here. Let's go ahead and set it up for wavelet turbulence. Turn off fire, we'll turn off fuel, we'll only do smoke. Don't need to worry about post-processing for the moment. Rendering settings again, turn off fire. Let's try an opacity of 3 for the smoke. We'll want it to cast and receive shadows. And we'll go ahead and just maybe do a little simple gray to white here. All right, that looks pretty good to start. So let's go ahead and we will grab, so I've got all 4 particle emitters showing here. I'm going to go ahead and create a particle emitter, and then I'm going to grab my particles, grab my emitter, and I'm going to attach selected. So all of my particles are now running off the same emitter. This will make making changes a lot easier. Go ahead and drop that icon size down. Let's go ahead and see our radius in the viewport and drop down that size a little bit. There we go. We want them to overlap, but not so much that, again, we're going to lose a lot of that shape. And we'll come down here. We'll turn our fuel to disabled. And we'll leave our temperature alone. And let's go ahead and up the amount of smoke. We're only emitting smoke. And this is also an answer to a question I was asked of, did I think FumeFX was doing anything better than Maya Fluids? And this is the one thing I do like it better for at this point, is doing straight smoke. I think that the plugin is not quite ready for prime time for every situation, but it is a first generation plugin, so that's to be expected. But I think it does do the smoke particularly well and a lot easier to work with in a lot of ways than the Maya Fluids. However, this setup could be done exactly the same way with Maya Fluids. Same particle system, you would just set up your Maya Fluids container and emit from the particles to the Maya Fluids container. You'd do it the exact same way. So I'm going to go ahead, come to my FumeFX volume. I'm going to come over, I'm going to add in the particle source and my spotlight together. I'll go ahead and save the scene, and I'll bring up my viewer, and let's go ahead and take a gander where we're going to get to with this one. And I can already tell I'm getting this weird thing where my GPU doesn't show me the preview right away. Haven't figured out why this works sometimes and then sometimes not. But we'll go ahead and just look through the viewport for a moment. Maybe switch over to the FumeFX viewport renderer. Nope, nothing there either. So what we'll have to do is let this go for a few frames here, and then we'll take a preview render on it just to kind of see what the look is. So we're not getting good feedback at the moment. Ah, there we go. There it's coming in. And you can see already we're getting a really nice shape here. And we're getting a lot of smoke coming off. And we'll just let this preview for a bit, and then we'll do a play blast back to see how the dissipation of the smoke is working and how the motion is. So I'm going to let this simulate, and then we'll come back in a minute when we've got enough frames, and we'll give it a test play. All right, so we've got 72 frames simulated here. Let's go ahead and take a preview. And we'll do 72 frames. I will go to my desktop and call this the test. And I'll go ahead and make the preview. I can already tell, I think the amount of dissipation I have is working really well because it's not overly filling the volume with smoke. As soon as it gets enough force to pull itself away, it's dissipating, and it's not even really hitting the walls of the container, which is great. I think overall this is looking really good. I think the only thing might be to boost the opacity of the smoke a little more come render time, but when we take a preview render, we'll see what the alpha is. I just noticed that I might be seeing a little bit of the backside of this tornado, which wouldn't really work. You want your tornado to be thick. Or at least I do. I want thick tornadoes. And yeah, that's looking pretty good. I'm liking this a lot, really. That is looking excellent. So I think what we want to talk about next is a little bit of rendering. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to open up, make sure I've got my Arnold renderer going. And again, you know, when it comes to rendering, Arnold really isn't the greatest solution yet either. Again, first generation plugin, but it does do the smoke out of Fume particularly well. So right now, my workflow for doing anything smoke related is Fume and Arnold. So I'm going to go ahead, pull up my IPR, and I'll let it preview nice and fast there. And I'm just going to come over and take a look. You see here in the alpha, we are definitely getting a little bit of, we're getting a little bit of transparency, and that's not necessarily what we're going to want. So I'm going to come down to my render settings. We could simulate some more particles, but I think what the short solution will be is just to pull up the opacity a bit. Let's try maybe 7. Just want to close this off. I don't want it to be so see-through. But I also don't want to push the opacity to the point where everything starts getting edgy and nasty. That's looking better. So you've got a much fuller, smoky look here. But it is a bit low resolution right now. So now that we're pretty sure our render will look okay once it goes to render, let's talk about different render passes for this. And what I thought worked really well was doing something at a fairly low to medium resolution. Let's try maybe 0.1. Yeah, about here, about 400 by 250 by 400 as the base. I simulated that out, and then what I did is simulated a wavelet turbulence out. And the wavelet turbulence ends up becoming very thin at that. So let me go ahead and save here. Let's show you what I'm talking about. So if I open up my simulated version, I can show you the different simulation layers that I created. And right here, I think we're looking at the wavelet. Oh no, we are looking at the wavelet here. So I'm looking at my post cache. So we're looking at the wavelet through the post cache right now. And if I pull up, let's drop this down to 540. And I'm going to pull up my IPR here. We're going to see that it's going to be very thin and very, very transparent once it went through wavelet turbulence. But there's a lot of beautiful detail in there as well. So as it starts to fill in, you'll see that there's a lot of very fine, very beautiful detail in this simulation. But if I switch over to the alpha, you can see it's not a lot of opacity. It's a very thin volume at this point. And that can work really well on top of other renders. So if I come over, let me close out the IPR, and I bring up my default simulation, you can see it's that same very puffy, not a lot of detail, but a lot of volume. So what I can do is take a couple different versions, and what I did was I created a low resolution base. I did a super high resolution wavelet. Instead of doing a 2, which is normal, I jumped this up to 4 for my grid scale. And then I did a post process so I could save out that wavelet. Then I did another wavelet at 2. So I have 2 different wavelets at 2 different levels of detail. So we'll switch over to the post and take a look at this IPR, which is again that very thin, very stringy kind of a look. So there we go. Now we can see again that fine detail versus the volume. So again, this is going to give us a lot of nice opacity. With this on top, we'll get a lot of the fine detail composited together. So let me go ahead and close this down and drop down Maya, and let me bring up my renders here in After Effects. So like I said, I had 3 renders I ended up doing. And if I come out to the middle here, we'll look at them one by one. So here is my original render, which was done at a low level of detail. You can see we're getting, good motion, we're getting a nice look, but not a lot of detail. So if I bring up my second version, which was done with a 2x wavelet, you'll see we're getting a little more detail, but we're starting to lose a lot of that opacity. So if I bring these 2 up together with my wavelet on top, we've got the benefits of both. And I can come in here and I can bring this default one, bring up my curves, and I can have a little fun by bringing down its color a little bit so that we get a little more depth to the render. And if I bring up the wavelet I did at 4x, which was this very thin, very wispy version, I can come in here and do something like tint it. and I can bring its color way down to make it start becoming more of a shadowy pass over the top, bringing me just a little more detail into everything. And one thing I didn't like was, again, because we're seeing transparently through it, we've got this little circle happening here. Now, for me, this wasn't a problem because what I could end up doing is just coming in and masking out that area that I don't want. So if I switch it to a subtract and I feather it quite a bit, we now have a lot of this other dark smoke and detail just adding on top of the rest of our simulations. Now we've got kind of the best of both worlds. We've got volume, we've got detail, and we've got a really nice, fun-looking tornado just spinning around. And there you go. The only thing I might have done differently is add in 2 more curves for the surface flow. I think 2 works really well as it starts climbing the column, but I think down here at the bottom, it may just need to be a bit thicker. I don't think there was quite enough volume down here, but that's an easy thing to change and add. If I come back to my initial state here, and I grab, let me delete my FumeFX here so I can see a little better. There we go. Just offset them 45 degrees. And come back, add a new curve flow, maybe 250 as my emission rate, create those. And now, as it starts to simulate, you'll see we're just getting a fuller amount of particles throughout this whole area and throughout the tornado as a whole. So I think this is a pretty simple tornado setup that works really well. And again, this is completely usable with Maya fluids as well. If I go ahead and open, just to prove the point, I did it with Maya fluids just to test it. And this is going to take a while. And the reason is just that viewport interaction. You can't reduce the number of voxels you're looking at. It's one of the reasons that I really do prefer this FumeFX for my straight smoke. So if I come over to my fluid, there we go. And I look at it in the attribute editor. There we go. And this is at a decent resolution. This is at a 10:1, so it should work pretty well. But you can see here in the side viewport, it does want to tear away a bit more, and it wasn't following the curve flow as well. But I do think that with more time, this simulation would have worked just as well. And I think that brings us to the end of this tutorial. Hopefully you've learned something that you can use in your work. If you have any questions, you can always hit me up on Twitter or Facebook or Google Plus or in the comments, or you can just scream or smoke signals. I'm accepting smoke signals now. If you want to keep learning, we have more tutorials and assets over at pixelbump.com. Thank you so much for watching. Go and create.